Hi, welcome to RunRebs Live. I'm Mike Grimala with Sean DeFrank from Vegas 7 and RunRebs.com. I want to talk a little about the Arizona game. The Rebels in it right up until the end. I think their best performance of the year. But let me read to you some numbers from their last 3 losses, including Arizona. Arizona State, final 5 minutes, 6 points. Illinois, final 7 minutes, 4 points. Final 9:57 against Arizona, UNLV scored 5 points. So is this a trend at this point that they're having trouble scoring late in games against tough competition?
I definitely think there's a pattern being established here, and definitely not a good one. Part of the Arizona game, Kendall Smith gone for essentially the last half of the second half. Obviously, that hurt him down the stretch. Daquan Cook wasn't as effective as he had been in some past games. DeVille Smith came off the bench briefly and did next to nothing. In fact, he was very detrimental his time out there. So yeah, there's definitely a trend being set here. They've really looked disoriented at the end of games, and plays have broken down, and it's ended up more often than not reverting to Bryce Dejon Jones shooting a bad jumper. So
I agree with what you said about Kendall Smith being out. I didn't think they got much at all from the backup point guards. Cook played most of that stretch once Kendall Smith went out. We've got a story up on RunRebs.com right now about sort of details how the offense sort of broke down without a point guard there to sort of generate any offense. And then on the other hand, you had Arizona with TJ McConnell, who's just creating plays and getting easy buckets pretty much every time down the court, down the stretch. But so, I mean, is there something they can do to get better in that area, scoring at the end of games? Can they scheme better? Are they going to have to start running plays through other guys, or do you just sort of trust that Kendall Smith is going to grow into that role and sort of be that guy who can be the point guard and sort of get the offense running when they really need it?
If Kendall Smith was a more seasoned player at this point, I think you could put more on his shoulders at the end of games. Mm-hmm. But since he is so relatively inexperienced at this point, I think a lot of it has to come down to scheme. Dave Rice has to come up with better plays at the end of games, and at times it's been hard to tell exactly what they're running at the end of games because they are so disoriented, and it does break down into a one-on-one type situation. So, without really knowing exactly what they're trying to accomplish at the end of games, I've got to put it on Dave Rice at this point.
And that was definitely a problem in the final 10 minutes against Arizona. They were in position to win that game, just couldn't score enough down the stretch. But I think overall that game has to be a positive considering the struggles that the Rebels have had, the inconsistency that they've had, to go on the road against the team that is now the #1 team in the country and play them down to the wire, toe-to-toe. One of the things I was struck by watching the game, watching the replay a few times, was the talent level. The Rebels, I don't think there was much of a talent disparity between Arizona and UNLV except at point guard, and even more so once Kendall Smith went out. But other than that, the Rebels can go toe-to-toe with that team in terms of talent. So, I mean, that it has to be a positive for if you're, hoping for the Rebels to sort of get on track and as they're heading into conference play.
You're right. The talent is there. I mean, we've all known that. There's, 3 high school All-Americans on the team. You've got Roscoe Smith. You've got Kendall Smith coming in as a freshman who's been outstanding. The talent is there. There's no question about that. The time to impress the NCAA selection committee, though, that time has passed. They're as nice as a moral victory of sorts that the Arizona game was. It's still another strike against them in the eyes of the NCAA selection committee. So, I mean, they had a week of practice last week leading up to that game. They've got another open week of practice this week leading up to the Southern Utah game. The rest of this month, they've got very winnable games, all at home or at least in Las Vegas, against mediocre teams. This is the time where the Rebels have to make some really big improvements going into the conference season, because that's what this year's success is going to come down to, is how well they fare in conference.
I agree with you. All right. Thanks, Sean.